Taylor. Yeah, Lisa Marie, do you want to do your question and we'll do Francis alongside you?
The Labour Party says that it's the only party to consistently stand with women. I joined because I believe this to be the case. The commitments made in your manifesto, such as creating a National Women's Commission and appointing a Commissioner for Violence Against Women and Girls, are commendable. The Labour manifesto also says that you will ensure that single sex-based exemptions contained in the Equality Act 2010 are understood and fully enforced in service provision. Please, could each of you explain how you are going to do this?
Thank you, Lisa. And Francis' question is, how will you dismantle the idea that any statement made by women about their sex-based rights constitutes transphobia? And how will you support women to discuss their sex-based rights free from intimidation and harassment and being labelled with pejorative terms such as transphobe or TERF? We're going to start with Keir.
Our party does and should stand with women. That is what we're about, and that's what we will be about under my leadership and under the leadership of any of us on this panel. We need to say that over and over and over again. And that means standing with women, whether you're a woman or you're a man, which is why the International Women's Day theme is so important, I think, this year. And when I was Director of Public Prosecutions, I saw this firsthand. You referenced violence against women and girls, because what I saw working with my staff in relation to the response to violence against women and girls was a criminal justice system that was set against the victims of violence against women and girls in a very, very profound way. And it was staggering, quite frankly. We had massive cases of grooming in the northwest of England, where young girls were being passed around in the most awful of circumstances and used for sex. And we started those massive prosecutions of those grooming cases. And one of them landed on my desk, and it became clear that we had previously, the prosecutors previously, had not prosecuted the same defendant. So I said, I want to understand why not. And when I looked into it, what I saw was good faith decisions by police officers and prosecutors who were trying to assess the credibility of the young women concerned. And they asked themselves, did these young women go straight to the police to report what had happened to them? And if the answer to that is no, then they're not likely to be credible. Did these young women go back to the perpetrators? And if the answer to that is no, then they're less likely to be credible, etc., etc. There were all these myths and stereotypes about how, particularly in violence against women and girls, people would respond. And my experience, and the experience of all the other prosecutors I had, is that actually, if you've been subject to sexual violence, the likelihood is you're not going to the police station at all. You're not going quickly. And you may well be going back to the perpetrator, because a lot of this violence happens within a relationship. And therefore, I spent 5 years of my time as DPP working with women's groups, working with women police officers and prosecutors to completely overhaul and change the approach to the way that we dealt with violence against women and girls. And it just got worse and worse and worse. Once you got into the support that goes in for victims, the money that goes into refugees, every twist and turn, there was a different story. And so I say that to demonstrate that standing with women has to mean something more than just a slogan on a platform. And I think it's important for all of us, particularly me on this panel, to demonstrate how I've done that in the past, so that people will know how to lead our party when we go into the challenges that we've got. And by the way, although we've made progress in criminal justice, there's a long, 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 long way to go. On the question of trans rights and
There is a question about women's
Yeah, just a
rights.
minute. Thanks. He's answering now.
I mean, I think the second question did mention trans rights, but
No, it's about accusation.
Right.
transphobia.
I was very clear at the beginning
No, just
that there wouldn't be any
clarifying
heckling, and the candidates are answering. Thank you.
I think it's really important that we recognise that trans rights are human rights, and that the trans community has been abused and vilified for a very, very long time. And we, the Labour Party, stand by and with people who've been vilified and abused in that way. The Gender Recognition Act was a big and important step in the right direction, but I don't think it goes far enough. Other countries have now gone further, and we need to go further. But if we are to go further, we have to have the debate in the right circumstances. This just gets so heated and becomes such a political football that nobody can find a way forward, and we need to deal with that. As for the Equalities Act, I'm a big fan of the Equalities Act. It's based on the Human Rights Act, and the Human Rights Act is something I've spent 20 or 30 years devising and then using as an instrument to promote equality and to deal with discrimination. So the principles at the heart of the Equalities Act I hold very, very dear, because they're the principles that have been in place for decades about how we solve difficult questions of equality and discrimination. And I think that may be a route through this, but we won't find a route through this if we don't conduct the debate in a much, much better way. We're doing nobody a service in the way that we are dealing with this debate.
Thanks very much. And first of all, can I say thank you to you for starting this question by going to Keir, because Becky and Emily and I have been asked a lot about this issue in the campaign, and it is deeply frustrating that we seem to think that when you're talking about women's rights and women's safety that this is only an issue for women. I was born a Manc because my parents moved to Manchester in the 70s so that my dad could take up a job as Deputy Director of the Equal Opportunities Commission when it was first set up, and he was one of the co-authors of the Second Equal Pay Act. And he taught me that this is not a fight for women alone. Actually, this is a fight for everyone who believes in a decent society. And I was really glad to hear what Keir said in response to the question. I mean, I think we've got ourselves into a really bad place on this issue in the party, where we're just pitting one group of rights against another, both of whom it should be perfectly possible to meet and both of whom it should be perfectly possible to stand up for. I used to work for the charity Centrepoint before I came into Parliament. We spent a lot of time working out policies and practices that would keep young people, particularly young women who'd often experienced domestic violence or prostitution, from harm in our hostels and keeping them safe and protecting those safe spaces. I know from the fights that my mum and others fought that there's a generation of women who fought very, very hard to establish safe spaces for women and believe that this really matters. I know because I represent a constituency, Wigan, with one of the highest domestic violence rates in the country, that it's not just that women are often under threat of harm and need safe spaces, it's that for a lot of those women they will always feel the need for safe spaces, and so they matter. And I want you to know that, and I want you to know, therefore, that this, when I say that trans men are men and trans women are women and they have rights that should be understood and should be respected, and the Labour Party I lead will always stand up for them. I do not see these things as mutually exclusive, and I will not allow two groups of people who deserve and our help and support and solidarity to be pitted against one another in this way. This is a debate. Far more light, and in my constituency I've got a young person who's going through the Gender Recognition Act process at the moment, and watching what she and her family have had to go through is one of the things that has driven me on, despite the level of anger and hatred and abuse that I've had in the last few weeks for standing up on this issue, because it's given me a very small taste of what her and her family have had to put up with over the last few years, going through this lengthy, awful process. There's no support. The waiting times are horrendous. The stigma is terrible. It's not a psychological condition to be trans, and we shouldn't stigmatise people as such. And that's why I don't agree, actually, that the Gender Recognition Act was a step forward, because I think it was something that was meant to provide support and help, and in fact has become one of the problems for trans people, one of the reasons that they're stigmatised and bullied and discriminated against, and why we've now got a situation that we should be ashamed of in this country, where trans people's suicide rates are sky high, where mental health is at rock bottom. And I think we'll look back on this time with astonishment that we allowed this to happen in this country. It reminds me of when I was growing up in the 1980s, when AIDS had become a real issue and the government was running advertising campaigns about it, and the level of stigma and discrimination towards gay and lesbian men and women was horrendous. It just wasn't understood, and people said it was a choice, and it was disgraceful, and we've got to do far, far better than this. So I want to make sure that we stand up for both and that we do both. And there is a wider point here in this party about the level of debate that we've been able to have in the last few years. Whether it's on this issue, whether it's on Brexit, whether it's on Israel-Palestine, I have sat in too many meetings watching two factions on either side of the argument go from 0 to 60 in just a couple of minutes. And I've watched people's faces in the audience over and over again as most people have just shut down and shut off because they can't find a way into that angry, polarising, binary debate. I will not accept it. And the leadership that I'm determined to bring to this party is as much about the level of political debate that we need and we deserve in this country as it is about anything else. God help us, look at what the Tories are doing to our political debate. Look at what people like Nigel Farage have done, introducing this poison into our public life. We have to do better, we must do better, we will do better.
Well, the good thing about this leadership campaign is that we often find ourselves agreeing with everything that each other says, so that's a good sign for the future. And it's become a very complex and upsetting issue within the party, and there should never ever be any contradiction between the rights of trans people and our party standing up for trans people and the rights and the safety of women. We need to make sure that we maintain both. And in terms of the arguments that have been discussed within this leadership campaign, it's been the issue of trans people and the dehumanising process that many have to go through to identify as a trans man or a trans woman, often undergoing psychiatric assessment, as well as quite a degrading process overall. And that's why I've committed to pushing forward the argument for enshrining self-ID in law and to make the process more human, more respectful, in the way that you would expect the Labour Party to do. But that has never been at the expense of standing up for women's rights. It's never been at the expense of amending the Equalities Act, which I stand up for to the hilt. By making sure...
Sorry, I was very clear. You will judge what you think about the answers. Carry on, Rebecca.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, I'm sorry. If you cannot sit quietly, I will ask you to leave. I was wholly clear about that at the beginning. People will judge the answers, but the answers will be heard.
Look, it's right for us to be passionate about this within the party, and as the candidates have said, we've always got to do it in a respectful and comradely manner, and I know that you feel passionately about this and you've not been disrespectful, and that's totally fine. But in terms of the Equalities Act, I've said repeatedly that I don't want to amend the single-sex exemption, and I think we need to explain that to people, because quite often in this debate, that's what's become quite confusing for people. Service providers now can prove that they need to have a single-sex exemption to protect potentially women that have been abused, undergoing domestic violence, and they need to be in an environment where they feel totally safe and secure.
Women in prison.
And women in prison as well, exactly. And that's it. That's the thing about this, is like the sensible way to respond to this is saying that women in prison, everything should be assessed on a case-by-case basis. No offender should be put into a prison that puts anybody at risk, never mind women at risk. And that's why we need to uphold the principles of the Equalities Act on this. But that's not completely separate to standing up for the rights of trans people, which you would expect the Labour Party to do. But on the issue of factionalism within the party, we do get passionate within the party, and it's right that we do. It's right that we have discussions and we disagree with each other, because that's healthy. And we are a broad church, and that's a positive thing. It's positive because having that wide breadth of opinion within the party actually makes us the most electable force and the most transformational force politically that the country has ever seen. But it only achieves that if we have our arguments in private, we're respectful, and once we agree a resolution, we unite behind that resolution and we campaign together to make sure that we elect a Labour government. And we haven't seen that over the last 4 years, unfortunately. We've seen infighting, and it has to stop, because nobody votes for a divided party.
Take one more question from those that have been submitted. I'm going to ask for crisp responses from the candidates, and then I'm going to open it to the floor for questions. And the question is from Bess, aged 9. And Bess says, were you ever bullied at school? And what would you do to stop people bullying each other at school and at work? Lisa.
Okay, thanks very much. I hated school actually, to be honest. Sorry, that's not the right message, is it? But I really didn't. I didn't like school at all, and I was bullied at school. I went to a lot of schools actually.